Hey, this is the YouTube lecture for Lesson 6. And in Lesson 6, we have the vocabulary over here that we're going to talk about. But the main idea about this lesson is about how to measure proportion and how to be able to draw real objects out in the real world or in a still life setup in a studio situation. So the first, we got this. We're going to work on the vocabulary. I want to talk about this illustration here, and then we'll talk about these over here, which is part of our homework assignment. Now, we talk about measuring. If you go back to Lesson 4, and you might recall from Lesson 4, I worked on this drawing with you, and we talked about contour drawing, which is what you're doing right now in Project 2. Well, I talked about measuring, and I talked about, well, if you lay a pencil here like this, wherever I grabbed the pencil became a measuring distance. And then if I moved it up here, I saw that this distance was larger. And I use that quite a bit in a lot of different applications. So all that's going to happen here now is that when we use a pencil, we're no longer able to use it on the paper to measure. We actually have to hold it in our hand and hold it at arm's length and measure something that's out there on the floor of the studio or whatever you happen to be drawing. So I want to talk about this, and then we'll get back to the vocabulary on this side. Now the first thing I want to talk about is, and most of what I'm going to be talking about today is in Part A here. This is relatively straightforward in terms of the fact that if you hold a pencil and you get a measurement here and you just double it, that's how you can find the middle of something. We'll get to ellipses more later. Although when you start drawing objects in Lesson 6 and 7, we will be referring to B and C. But right now, this proportional project that you have for homework deals mostly with A. So that's what I want to talk about right now. So I'm basically going to redraw these. Now, first of all, it's kind of an optical illusion. And so what I want to do here to start out is draw a couple horizontal lines on here. Now, I take this horizontal line, and it's about this wide. You see what I did? I'm grabbing it with my fingers here, and the edge of my pencil here. And that's, it's fairly even. So I want to make two squares over here. So I got another pencil here, and I'll make a mark at the edge of that pencil and where my fingers are. Okay, so I'll lightly draw. Now this is a square. I want to draw another square next to it. Now I'm just doing a little layout here because I have I want to make a comparison for you that really does appear to be an optical illusion, and because of that, it's very important. The whole idea of drawing objects is that you have a simple geometric shape around them. Okay, so we'll start out over here, and I'm going to draw a outline or a line drawing. And so you may notice, you say, well, it looks like a box in perspective. Now, if I was to take that, and this is in a square. Now, if I was to take another, and I'm going to do the same thing over here, but it's not going to be the same. Now, in here you have an elongated box. And here you have basically a cube. But both of them occupy the same shape, which is a square. And so the idea here is that most of the time when you're looking at objects like this, you don't realize what kind of shape it's taking up, and so you tend to draw it disproportional. In other words, this entire shape is basically a one-to-one relationship when it's a square. In other words, usually they're written in height versus the width. And so if the height is 1 and the width is 1, they have a one-to-one relationship. So in this, it's the same thing, although it visually doesn't look that way. So in a way, it's very important that you draw a simple shape around every object in order to tell how it's supposed to look. Because what'll happen here is, if you don't do it like that, you can come up with a object. Let's say I'm just going to put this over this. And if I was going to draw the same object, you may draw it like this. And think that this is that. And if you were to draw, and you know, because if you can't measure it, then you really don't know exactly what you have. And so when I'm illustrating this on a piece of paper with a pencil, what I'm really telling you to do here, see now how that's a vertical, is that you're going to use your pencil to do that. In other words, you'll actually use your pencil to measure the object that's on the floor, for instance, in a studio. And you say, well, how am I going to do that? Well, again, you grab the pencil like this, and you notice how, I'll do it this way. If I put the pencil here, and I grab it here, I have now defined this height. Now, I hope that the camera will show this, but as you see, as I bring the pencil closer to the camera, the pencil gets bigger, and so the measurement that you see in the screen is too long. And so now the pencil would have to be shorter in order to approximate your visual perception of how high that line was. And so that's called holding the pencil at arm's length, and you're using this as a measurement, and that's all you're really doing. And if it is not lined up exactly the way you want it, then you have to move it a little closer or a little farther away from your eye, or you need to move your finger up or down the pencil a little bit. The second part of this is a proportional measurement of a plane. Now, in this case, if this is any side is a plane, and a plane is defined by 4 edges, 4 sides, could be any amount of sides. If I measure the width of this one, and then I measure this one, I say, well, this one's a little wider than this one. Well, then that means this line is not in the middle. Well, that's a very good thing to know, because you can't tell. This one, gets to be a lot more important, and in the homework it'll be the same thing. If I measure this one, and you can, if you're measuring this on a piece of paper, it's pretty easy, but that's the way we can illustrate this, because you have to hold it out there and look at it yourself when you're looking at a real object. But if I hold this here and do this, I got 1, 2, and a little space. So the relationship of this plane here to this plane here, and again, I'm drawing another larger, simple shape around this. And why did I do that? Because the height is the most extreme corners, you see, and that means, because this is called a receding plane in this illusion, and so if I didn't have the height and I only had the width, I could get the width right, but I wouldn't get the height right. Okay, so this, it would be written as this is 1, and this is 2 plus an amount. Now this is not math, so I guess you could say, well, you could divide this into fourths or thirds, and I just use a decimal system, so I would say that's about a 2.3. So that's about 2 1/3 inches, or 2 1/3 parts of this whole part here. So this is about 3 of these would equal 1 of these. And so you would write that like this. And But you don't really have to do that. You can just measure it if you're looking at it. And we're looking at a box on the floor, and it looks like this, and you draw it on your paper, and it looks like this one. And I say, well, this side's a lot longer than that side. And you say, well, how do you know? Well, you measure it by holding your arm at arm's length and use your pencil to measure one plane to another. Okay? So that is what this whole exercise, this whole illustration and part A of this exercise is about. Now, if we go back to some of the vocabulary, one of the things we have is composition is in the vocabulary this time, but that term we've been using already a lot, and just means the arrangement of objects in the picture plane that contain all of the things that we've been talking about, like balance and emphasis and focal point and repetition, and all of these things in a harmonious arrangement is what a composition is. Now, if we're going to talk about mass, we have this example in the book here. You know, you've got a few words here. You have volume, mass, and visual weight. And not to get these things confused, but volume is the amount of space that something takes up in a drawing. So if I go back to this one and I want to use, well, let's use the other side here. So if I go back to these two things that I drew earlier. So we had this one and this one. Okay, so we have a picture plane. Now, both of these are outlines. Neither one of them have a lot of presence. They really don't have any volume, because what is volume? Volume is a amount of space. Well, I don't see it taking up any space. It is, but it's very weak. And what is mass? That's visual weight. Well, both of them are very lightweight. Okay? And what is visual weight? Well, it defines a relationship of the two. So if I want something that, in this example here, which refers to this example of volume and mass, well, if I do mass first, which is visual weight, and make a solid. So now I have an object that has a lot of what's called mass to it. And that's basically what that means, is that it approximates a kind of a mass as it relates to the background. Now, if I do the same thing to this one, it doesn't have the same amount of mass because it doesn't have the contrast. Okay? So does it take up the same amount of space? Because there isn't much contrast, it does not appear to be as big or as imposing or take up as much space. Okay? So as a weight, which is mass, and volume, which is the amount of space, this one wins both times. So now the visual weight of a picture plane, the visual weight is the relationship. This doesn't have visual weight by itself. This has volume and mass. When you do this, now it has more weight than the other thing. That's how you can remember the difference between the two. Okay, I want to go back now to this. This is your homework project, and this relates quite a bit to this type of measurement. And so, first thing I want to do here is I'm going to take the back of this sheet. Now let's look at, this one is usually the most perplexing to people. Your exercise is down here, and what you have to do is enlarge these 3 times to the right proportion. Now, I put them on a black, simple shape for you, and I wanted you to make those relationships that we just talked about. In other words, you notice on this one, this goes uphill. You notice on this one side appears straighter than the other side. This one gets a little complicated. It looks like a diamond, but you know that it's a square piece of paper if I was to put this on the floor in the studio, because that's what it is. This is what's called an oblique angle, okay? An oblique just simply means that it goes off in one linear direction, one way or the other, with no particular vertical or horizontal arrangement. So it's just an oblique line or an oblique angle. So if I wanted to draw this, and so what I'm going to do here is I'll leave it here, and let's say you don't draw it. So I draw it like this, because that's what it is, it's square. So now you're looking at this and you go, well, I'm not sure, that doesn't look right. Well, there's quite a few things here that you can look at when doing this, okay? Number one is, if this is a straight line, you can use your pencil as a straight line. If this was on the floor, you could use your pencil horizontally when you're looking at things. And you could go from, and this is what's called the bottom, farthest most part on the bottom, or closest corner. And if I was to raise my pencil up straight in a straight line, you'll notice if I run across this corner over here, it's lower than the right corner. Is that true here? No. And then I can hold it perfectly vertical and do the same thing. So I hold it vertical and I touch the closest corner in the front, and it looks like the back corner is on the left. I do that here, and that's not true either. Okay, so this is one way you can use your pencil, not as a measuring tool, but as an alignment tool, and you'll learn more about that in the next lesson. But to do this, the first thing you're going to do is you have to get the proportions of these three shapes, which means the black shape. And you have to enlarge it 3 times. You'll have to measure it on a piece of paper here, like this. This one's about 1 to 2.5. And then you'll have to figure out the other ones. You have to and make these 3 times bigger. You can use a ruler to do that at home. It'll end up filling up a 18 by 24 piece of paper, each one of these. So you'll have one of these on each piece of paper in your large sketch pad. That's what you're going to be doing. Next thing is how do you redraw this? Okay, well, you can look at the measurements in here. And so that's the first thing that you'll do is say, well, if I was to tighten these up and touch them, then you'd have some negative space in there, but this one is very difficult, and the only way you can work with this one is to look